Hello everyone, today I'm setting up my bullet journal for October, and before we start I just wanted to say a huge thank you for 10,000 subscribers. I don't want to talk about this too much, but I thought it would be fun to make another Q&A video to celebrate. So if you have any questions, you can leave them under my pinned comment down below. And I also wanted to show you the spread from my 2022 setup, because I remember thinking maybe 10,000 by the end of the year is a bit of a reach, but we actually did it, so I thought that was really funny. Now let's actually get into the video. I'm going to show you a quick flip through of my September spreads as always, and I'm showing off all of your beautiful recreations from Instagram. So if you would like to be featured in a future video, you can tag me on Instagram at @artandbujos. I think for September I especially loved my weekly spreads because I tried to play around a lot with the layout and like the placement of the koi fish illustrations, and it was honestly very therapeutic to draw them each week. So I have one more weekly spread after this one, and then I'm starting my October setup on these two pages. For this month I chose a very autumnal color palette, so all of the markers are a bit more muted and also kind of on the darker side, except for a very light yellow that I thought would be perfect for backgrounds. And then I'm also using my usual gel pen by Muji in 0.5 and the Uni-ball Signo white gel pen for my titles, because I also wanted to incorporate this brown craft paper tape from StationeryPal as a background, and you can use my code ARTandBujos for 12% off as well. First off, I'm making a work planner that I've been using for the last couple of months, where I basically use a color code to plan out different types of work that I need to do. This time I'm making a bit of a smaller version because I noticed that I didn't need two of the categories I used last month, so I'm just kind of adjusting it to my needs. I used some of the craft paper tape as a background for the weekdays on the top, and then I wrote the weekdays themselves in white, and I love having that grid texture because it's much easier to cut it straight that way and also just to write on it. Next, I'm using the light yellow marker to color in every third line where I'm going to write the dates, and the dates here are 2 spaces wide and 3 spaces tall, so that when I write the dates I'll be left with 4 dot grid spaces that I can color in. For the borders, I used the darker yellow shade, which is actually the same one I used in my September setup, and it's just a really nice golden yellow shade, so I thought it would be perfect for this theme, which will be sunflowers, and I actually got this idea by Kayla on YouTube, so thank you so much for your suggestion, and if you guys have any other theme ideas, definitely leave them down below as well. Here I'm crossing out the last few days of September as well as the first ones of November, and by the way, October ends on a Monday this year, which is an absolute nightmare for bullet journaling because then it's basically 6 weeks instead of the usual 5, but I think this works pretty well. Anyway, I'm writing the dates in black, and I actually included September and November as well because I thought it just looked a little bit odd if they're just empty otherwise. Now for the doodles this month, I really needed something super simple and quick because I'm probably going to be very busy with university, so I just used 3 markers to draw these sunflowers. First, I just made a circle or an oval with a brown to give a bit of variation, and then I drew the petals with that golden yellow marker. And I think the bigger tip actually works really well for creating the petal shapes, but I kept them pretty rough overall because, again, I needed the doodles to be super quick and easy to do. Lastly, I also used the green to either add little leaves or a stem and leaves, and again I wasn't super careful with the placement or anything, but I think they actually turned out really cute, and I didn't end up outlining anything or adding more detail either because I felt like they had a certain charm to them just like that. With the fine liner tip of the darker yellow, I also drew some of these little stars to just fill in some of the empty spots so that it looks nice and full. And then underneath the calendar, I'm making my little color code. So I have 4 colors and I assigned them to stuff for university, my YouTube channel, Instagram, and my freelance job. And then I can plan out my weeks a bit better like you saw in my September spread at the beginning. Underneath, I'm adding my YouTube and Instagram growth trackers, so I used the light yellow as a background for the titles, and then I cut out 2 more pieces of that craft paper tape for the sections. Then I'm writing the titles in black, and I just write down my sub or follower count on the 1st of October and then on the 31st, and then how many I gained in that month, which is always fun to look back on. On the right there was a bit more space, so I just drew another smaller sunflower. Now for the cover page, I wanted to have a ring of sunflowers and then a title in the middle, and I had everything sketched out beforehand, so I drew all of the middle parts of the flowers first, but I forgot that I actually wanted to have a gingham pattern in the middle with that light yellow shade, so I had to add it a bit later on. I tried to vary the positions of the flower heads a bit since sunflowers always face the sun, and I thought it just looked a little bit more interesting that way. So here I started to draw the first flower, and then I remembered what I had planned for the gingham pattern, but since the other yellow shade is super light, it actually wasn't a big deal, and I just went over what I had already drawn. I felt like the pattern would fit really nicely because it reminds me of picnic blankets, and I thought it would just be a nice fit for a fall theme, and it also just adds a bit more color to the middle of the circle. Then I just continued to draw all the petals for the rest of the sunflowers, and I also kind of tried to show the direction of the flowers when they're tilted, so I made some of the petals a little bit bigger on the one side and then more flat on the other, so I hope that makes sense, and I wanted some of them to overlap a bit as well, so that they're not super evenly spaced out around the edges, because I felt like that would make it look a little bit more interesting. With a dark green marker, I completed the circle shape in between the flowers so that it kind of looks more like a flower wreath. And then I also drew some leaves all around following the direction of the circle. For the title, I used more craft paper tape and I just wrote October in my go-to font, which is kind of just like a basic hand lettering style. Then I cut off the excess and placed it in the middle of the flower wreath, and then I also added a few more of those little stars, but I tried not to go too overboard with it because I tend to do that and then it just looks super chaotic. But yeah, that is the first spread all finished. I love the color palette and I think it's just perfect for October. So let's move on to the next page, which is dedicated to my habit trackers as always. I kept the style of the title the same as on the cover page, so I wrote it in white on a piece of craft paper tape. Then I also wanted to incorporate the gingham pattern again, so I drew it as a background for the title along the top of the page. Here I'm placing the title centered on the top, and then I wanted to draw a few smaller sunflowers next to it to decorate the title a bit more. I feel like the style of the doodles kind of reminds me of the way like you used to draw flowers as a kid, and I really like the look of it for this one. It's just really simple but cute. Then of course I'm adding more little stars to fill any empty spots, and for my habit trackers this month I did 6 habits and I placed them on the sides so that there is space in the middle that I can fill with more doodles and a little quote. I always like using this layout because it kind of breaks up the more structured trackers and it also gives the page a bit more variation. For the habits, I used the light yellow as a background first, and here I'm writing the weekdays with the darker yellow shade. Then I'm writing my actual habits, which this month I'm tracking doing my morning routine, taking my medication, doing a 5-minute stretch, practicing my art skills, planning my day in my bullet journal, and working out. For the trackers, I decided to use more of the craft paper tape because the grid on it actually lines up with the dot grid spaces, so 4 little squares on the tape are 1 dot grid space in my journal, so I don't actually have to measure anything out to fill it in later. You can see it a bit better here where I'm crossing out the days from September and November, so every second line of the grid on the tape lines up with one of the dots in my journal. Now for the middle part, I sketched out the quote in pencil first so that it's nice and centered, and then I used the light yellow again as a background. And the quote I chose is "Life starts all over again when it gets crisp in the fall," which is actually from the book The Great Gatsby, but I thought it was a really nice fit for this theme. And then of course I drew some more sunflowers on the top as well as below the quote, which I think ended up looking super cute. Now, because October ends up having 6 weeks, the trackers are a bit taller than usual, and there's less space on the bottom for my weekly habits, but I just split them into 2 columns and that worked out just fine. So this month I'm tracking watering my plants, making my weekly spreads in my bullet journal, studying Korean, and cleaning my room, and I drew 5 little circles underneath each one that I can color in once I completed a habit. On the right page, I wanted to make the same Instagram content planner that I made for last month because it really helps me to stay on track with posting more or less consistently. So first I made the same style of header, but I forgot the gingham pattern once again, and spoiler, I did forget it once more for the section below this one, but it was a pretty easy fix because again the color is super light, so I can just go over the sunflowers and you don't actually notice it, which is what I'm doing here. To plan out my posts, I'm just making a simple section, so I used the light yellow first to color in every second line because it just looks nice, and then I made a border with the darker yellow shade, and I also split the section into 3 columns. The first one is for my description, so for example my October cover page or weekly spreads. The second one is for the date when I want to post it, and then I make 4 circles in the third column to track my progress. In case you haven't noticed, I really love using color codes, so that's what I'm doing here as well. The dark green is for when I made a spread, the light yellow is for when I took pictures from my posts, the brown is for when I edited the pics, and then the dark yellow is for when I posted it on Instagram. And I just fill in the circles as I go so that I know what I still need to do and I can post on time. And then here I'm adding the key for my color code underneath the section. Now, since I'm starting university again in October, I wanted to have an overview of all my classes in my bullet journal, so I'm making a simple spread that I can fill in with my timetable. So again, same style of header, and I actually noticed that I forgot the gingham pattern a little bit sooner this time, so I'm just adding it here, and then I drew 2 little sunflowers next to the title. Underneath, I made a small weekly overview for my timetable, so I just included Monday through Friday, and again I'm coloring in every second line with that light yellow because I just think it looks nice if the sections aren't completely empty. And then I wrote the weekdays on top in black, and I'm outlining everything with a darker yellow. I feel like the 2 yellow shades were so pretty together, and just looking at the color palette kind of reminds me of when the leaves all turn yellow and orange in fall, and it just makes me feel so cozy, which I thought was perfect for this month. On the right, I'm filling the space with more little sunflowers so that the spread looks more balanced overall. And that's it for these 2 pages, so let's move on to my first weekly spread of October. I wanted to keep the layout super simple with lots of space for planning because the first week is probably going to be a bit more stressful for me, so I made the daily sections pretty big. For the headers, I'm using more of the craft paper tape and then writing the weekdays in white on top of it. Then I'm once again coloring in every second line of the daily sections with the light yellow shade, and I love watching this black super sped up, it's always so satisfying. On the bottom right of each section, I'm writing the dates, and I started with the 3rd of October since I included the 1st and the 2nd in my last weekly spread of September. I always just kind of choose based on which month has more days in a week, whether to include it in the current or the next setup. Here I'm making the borders with the darker yellow shade again, and I actually ended up adding little details later on because I thought the sections looked a little bit boring otherwise. In that empty section on the top left, I wanted to include a mini calendar because I like to have an overview of all the weeks. So I used the light yellow as a background for the weekdays and then wrote the dates and weekdays on top in black. And I also crossed out the other days with the darker yellow. Then I added the border all around with the same yellow just to keep things consistent and because I also wanted it to be kind of the main color in this whole setup. And then I drew a couple more sunflowers underneath the mini calendar as if they're kind of peeking out from the border, which I thought looked really cute. Now here's where I decided I wanted to add more detail to the daily sections, and I ended up just drawing some really small sunflowers along the right border and then using the green to cover up the yellow and also to draw a few small leaves. And I thought this looked super cute and just gave the whole spread more color and made it a lot prettier too, so I did it for the rest of the sections as well and just alternated between having 2 or 3 sunflowers so that it's not too boring. And that's it for my weekly spread. I think the small sunflowers added so much to that whole page, and I think it just turned out really adorable. So let's go ahead and do a little flip through. Honestly, these doodles are probably one of the easiest, or at least the quickest ones I've done so far, but I think sometimes this really is more, and I just love the color palette, so I really hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you again for all of your support, and if you like my content, consider subscribing to my channel to see more of my videos. And again, you can leave any of your questions for my Q&A video under my pinned comments so that I don't miss any of them. And I think I'm probably just gonna paint something like maybe another Studio Ghibli scene. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope I'll see you again next time. Bye!